quite typical of the daily fare.
Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch
Sample any
broadcasting
more
from the
of them,
Mushroom
but you
Mansion
can
House
see
in
them every
Mexico,
time you open the
working on
press.
oil painting Space
Let's
Mountain,
continue to
starting
review
oil
the
painting
experiment
Space Mountain.
that humans are undertaking.
Alright, this one's going to be kind of
Recent
complex,
dates.
I think.
Let's take last November
I think
8th.
Might be simpler than I
3 events took place last November
am
8th.
conceiving it.
One of them was
But
very
we'll see.
important.
So here we go.
One was extremely important, and the third was utterly astonishing. The least
Conceiving it
of the
as...
three, the least important, was the election in the United States. Plenty of publicity, important, but the least important of the three. The more important by far of the three took place in Morocco. In Marrakesh, Morocco, about 200 nations were participating in a UN-sponsored international conference, COP22 it was called, which was an attempt to put some teeth in the Paris negotiations on climate change of the preceding year. It had been hoped at Paris that they could reach a verifiable treaty on actions to address climate change, but that couldn't be done because of a single barrier. It's called the Republican Party. The Republican Congress in the United States would not accept any verifiable agreements. So Paris negotiations ended with just verbal commitments. The Morocco conference was an attempt to go beyond that. And as it began, it was moving in that direction. On November 8th, there was a report by the World Meteorological Organization. Quoting it, it confirms that 2016 was the warmest year on record, a remarkable 1.1 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial period, sharply above the previous record set in 2015, approaching the desired upper limit set in Paris, and goes on with other dire reports. Now, that was November 8th. At that point, the deliberations ended. The electoral results came in from the United States, and the meeting shifted to another question. Can the world survive when the richest, most powerful country in world history with incomparable advantages not only is withdrawing from the effort to try to save the world from destruction, but is undertaking a dedicated commitment to race to the precipice as quickly as possible. And the countries of the world were looking for a savior. China, looking to China to save the world from the disaster that is being led by the United States. That was the most important event that took place on November 8th. There was also an astonishing event. It wasn't discussed. Astonishing. Silence. The leader of the free world is leading the world to disaster. That's us. The world is looking to China, of all places, to save it. And the reaction here, take a look back, total silence. Utterly astonishing. Can't find words to describe it. Well, that's November 8th. Let's go on to March 1st. On March 1st, a scientific study was released showing that tens of thousands of miles of permafrost in northwest Canada are rapidly melting, along with massive decline, accelerating decline in permafrost in Alaska, Siberia, and Scandinavia. That could lead to massive release of greenhouse gases, CO2 and methane, which is all being accelerated by an unprecedented Arctic heat wave. And that was the world. Now, what happened in the United States on March 1st? The Trump administration decided to help the process along by rescinding the methane rule, which limits release of methane from oil and gas drilling sites on federal lands. And it also announced sharp cuts in Environmental Protection Agency staff and programs, even announcing a ban on research. Actually, just this morning, we received some more good news. Turns out that the rate of melting of permafrost has been underestimated by 20%. The already near lethal consequences are worse than we thought. Well, let's go on to March 16th. The world and the United States. The world, a new study appeared, scientific study, on damage to the Great Barrier Reef off Australia. It's one of the world's largest living structures. It's being severely damaged, intensifying, reported by far the most widespread and damaging of recent mass bleaching of coral reefs since 1998, with very wide-ranging, disastrous ecological results. And that's the world. In the United States, on the same day, the president's budget was released. The Environmental Protection Agency was virtually dismantled. It's now pretty much run by Senator James Inhofe and his associates. He's the leading climate change denier in the Senate. He's also an extreme fundamentalist. His position is that if God is warming the earth, so be it. It would be sacrilegious to interfere with God's will. And that's the least of it. Well, most of the attention's been focused on the EPA, but for action and research on climate, EPA is a small actor. Far more important is the Department of Energy, and its Office of Science, under the budget, is scheduled to lose $900 million, 20% of its budget. Its $300 million ARPA energy program is eliminated completely, and there are deep cuts in the research programs there. And at the EPA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also a 5% cut to NASA's Earth Science budget. It's actually pretty remarkable to observe the intensity of the administration's hatred of unwanted facts. Just 2 days ago, the New York Times reported the concern of climate scientists that the Trump budget cuts calls for closing down NASA's main missions that monitor the global climate. That's a pittance in the budget. It's a statistical error, practically. But it has a major impact on understanding of what's happening to the world. But it's best not to know what we do not like. That's a guiding principle of the administration and indeed the Republican Party. The budget itself is of unusual savagery, even for the Paul Ryan wing of the Republican establishment, which is effectively running the show behind the facade of the Trump Spicer Twitter affairs, which are designed to grab the headlines. It's a bitter attack. If you look at the details, it's a bitter attack on the working class and on the poor, while lavishing even more gifts on the wealthy and the corporate sector, along with, I think, what we can describe as a project of Talibanization of America, literally, in accordance with the Bannon, Sessions, DeVos ideal of a society, which they've made explicit, a society based on Judeo-Christian tradition, white supremacy, destruction of the humanities, the arts, public schooling, even medical research. Well, practically every issue of the science journals provides more grim forecasts. There's one recent paper in the journal Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics by noted climate scientist James Hansen, 18 others, compares today's climate with that of 120,000 years ago, when temperatures were only slightly warmer than today. At that time, it turns out there was a sea level rise of 20 to 30 feet when much of the polar ice disintegrated. And the paper predicts not only that, but in the near future, a killer storm stronger than any in modern times, disintegration of large parts of the polar ice sheets, leading to the melting of huge glaciers, and a rise in the sea sufficient to begin drowning the world's coastal cities before the end of this century. Hansen says we're in danger of handing young people a situation that's out of their control, with precipitous rises in sea level not far down the road and other dire consequences. Now, there are other studies that indicate that climate change is occurring faster than at any time in the past 100 million years, by some estimates far faster. Last year, atmospheric CO2 passed the symbolic level of 400 particles per million, considered a crucial danger point. It's the first time in 4 million years and possibly irreversible. Well, that's only a small sample of many such reports. They appear regularly in the science journals. Sometimes they make it to the major media. Meanwhile, the Republican wrecking ball is systematically dismantling the structures that offer any hope for decent survival. And it's not just Trump. The whole Republican Party leadership at the national level, and indeed at much of the local level. So in North Carolina, a couple of years ago, a scientific study was commissioned by the Coastal Resources Commission, which estimated that the sea level in North Carolina will rise by almost 40 inches by the end of the century. And the Republican-run legislature had a response. It passed a law that barred state and local agencies from developing regulations or planning documents anticipating a rise in sea level. Now, the best comment on this that I saw was by Stephen Kohlberg. He said, "This is a brilliant solution. If your science gives you a result that you don't like, pass a law saying the result is illegal. Problem solved." Unfortunately, that's not a joke. It captures all too well the mentality of the Republican Party leadership. A couple of years ago, Bobby Jindal, the Republican governor of Louisiana, who succeeded in sinking it even deeper into the abyss, he warned Republicans that they're becoming the stupid party. The respected conservative political analysts Thomas Mann and Norman Ornstein of the American Enterprise Institute described the party as a radical insurgency that has abandoned parliamentary democracy and, for that matter, rationality. And perhaps a simpler characterization is the utterly outrageous charge that they have become the most dangerous organization in world history, dedicated to destruction of the prospects of decent survival. Indeed, an outrageous charge, but is it wrong? Well, I already mentioned Paris 2015 and Marrakesh, Morocco 2016. Let's go back to the 2016 primary campaign. It was pretty surprising in many respects, but primarily because of the attitude of the candidates to climate change. Every single Republican candidate either denied that what is happening, or the sensible moderates like Jeb Bush said it's all uncertain, but we don't have to do anything about it because we're producing more natural gas thanks to fracking. Or John Kasich, who was supposedly the adult in the room who did at least agree that it's taking place, global warming, but he says, we're going to burn coal in Ohio and we're not going to apologize for it. As for the media, they just ignored it. After all, it's only the most important issue in human history. And those who think it's better in Europe can turn to a recent poll showing that a majority of Europeans want a total ban on immigration from Muslim-majority countries. That's including the people in Bangladesh, tens of millions of whom are going to flee as coastal from the coastal plains as the sea level rises, creating a refugee crisis of the kind that we can't even imagine. The general idea is first we destroy them, then we punish them for trying to escape from the ruins, and we call it a refugee crisis. In Europe, when thousands drown in the Mediterranean fleeing from Africa, where Europe, after all, has a certain history. Same with us in Central America. In fact, the refugee crisis is a serious moral, cultural crisis in the West, here and in Europe. Well, let's go to one final date, one of the most important dates of human history, the end of World War II. It was a moment of joy. It was a moment of horror, the dawn of the nuclear age. I can remember well my own feelings when the grim news was announced on August 6th. Horror at the events and their import, and astonishment that so few people seemed to care about the enormity of what had just happened, or that we had entered into what may soon be the final era of human existence, the nuclear age. I mentioned the doomsday clock, 7 minutes to midnight. Well, it turns out that we not only entered the nuclear age at that time, but as was not then known, we also entered a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, a geological epoch in which human activity is dramatically changing the environment. Now, there have been debates about the inception of the Anthropocene, but it's been pretty much settled by the World Geological Society, which settled on the end of World War II, partly because of the radioactive elements that were being dispersed across the planet by nuclear bomb tests, other consequences of human action, including a significant increase in greenhouse emissions. So the nuclear age and the Anthropocene coincide, all of which raises the lingering question, is it better to be smart than stupid? We only have a few years to try to answer that question. Well, how are we answering it? I mentioned a couple examples. There are a few more to think about. The one step was George W. Bush's abrogation of the ABM Treaty, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. It's followed now by ABM installations near the Russian border. The alleged reason is defense against non-existent Iranian nuclear missiles. Nobody believes that. Russia has very good reason to regard those installations as a first strike weapon. It's a particularly severe threat now in the light of the information I just quoted about U.S. nuclear modernization, which makes it possible for the U.S. to wipe out their deterrent. Well, the next step after abrogation of the ABM Treaty was offering NATO membership to Ukraine in 2008. That's the Russian geostrategic heartland. They'll never tolerate it, of course. Efforts pursued by Obama and Clinton. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is now up for grabs. It would at least end nuclear tests, which would be a considerable step forward. Can't go into force until it's ratified by the three crucial holdouts: China, Israel, and the United States. The major nuclear powers, the U.S. and Russia, are both expanding arsenals in very dangerous ways. One of the U.S. proposals is tactical nukes that can be scaled down to battlefield use by commanders on the scene, with very likely rapid escalation that, of course, leads to termination. And the flashpoints are becoming much more serious, particularly on the Russian border. And it's important to remember it's the Russian border, it's not the Mexican border. That's a result of expansion of NATO right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, in violation of verbal promises to Gorbachev that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east. That was the phrase, meaning East Germany, if Gorbachev agreed to unification of Germany within NATO, a hostile military alliance. There's recent archival work by diplomatic historian Joshua Schifrinson, which very strongly suggests that President Bush, the first Bush, and his Secretary of State James Baker were consciously deceiving Gorbachev. That Gorbachev's vision of a European common home, a security system from Brussels to Vladivostok with no military alliances, that's unfortunately a fading dream. George Kennan and other senior statesmen had warned early on that NATO expansion is what Kennan called a tragic mistake, a policy error of historic proportions. It's now leading to rising tensions on the traditional invasion route through which Russia was virtually destroyed twice during the past century by Germany alone, and the risk of nuclear war is not slight. Well, as for global warming, we're answering Meyer's question by unilateral efforts, unilateral withdrawal from the world's efforts to address the crisis, replacing them with a dedicated race to the precipice even more rapidly by sharply increasing fossil fuel use, including coal, refusing promised subsidies to poorer countries to develop nuclear energy, dismantling the regulatory apparatus so that profits can boom along with threats to survival. And we cannot stress too strongly the enormity of the fact that the United States is alone in the world in this respect since November 8th. And the no less astonishing fact that this extraordinary development barely registers in the information system should have screaming headlines and be the most prominent issue in the academic intellectual world, which is more evidence about the great derangement. Well, outside of the world center of devastation and destruction, which is right here, some things are being done. Not enough by any means, but not negligible, and an indication of what is possible. So Denmark is aiming to reach 100% renewable energy within 20 years in all sectors by 2050. Germany, which is the most successful state capitalist economy, has tripled renewable energy for electricity in the past decade, aims to increase it to almost half by 2025 and more than 80% by 2050, and by then to have reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 80 to 90% of 1990 levels. China is still a huge polluter, but it's also well in the lead in production of solar panels, development of advanced solar technology. In the United States, Hawaii passed a law mandating that all the state's electricity will come from renewable sources no later than 2045. And several Massachusetts Democrats have filed a bill, SB 1932, requiring that the state use 100% renewable energy by 2035, mandating elimination of all fossil fuels by 2050, so that would be 100% renewables. San Diego is the first large city planning to run on 100% renewable energy, cut greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2035, and that happens to be a bipartisan.
All right, so that was a fun start. I think I'll detail it more, a lot more. But that's the general idea, the theme for Space Mountain. Sort of a Brahman, or Brahman is the order. Shit, I can't remember exactly the order in which
federal
the lotus
government,
blossom
if
deity
it's
sits.
the right hand,
If he is the Brahman sitting up on the lotus blossom of the Brahman, which is the eternal
to try to
you know,
shift all
energy
households
of the
to
universe,
renewable
or
energy
that's
in
the
40
cosmic
years.
ocean.
It's quite
But anyway,
feasible.
that's the idea. Is
Great
the
many
the
jobs,
Brahman Brahman
along with
column sitting on the
weatherization,
lotus flower of the
farms,
ocean of eternity,
conservation,
and the space
federal
pouring out of his head,
regulations in recent years
and
have
Space
had
Mountain, the roller
some
coaster,
positive
rolling through his
effects,
chest
counterbalanced,
and out into the edge of the
unfortunately,
canvas.
with support
So that's
for
kind of a
fossil
fun
fuel
idea, and
production.
I'll do a little research into my Joseph Campbell descriptions of
Not
the
enough, but it's an indication of what can
lotus
be done.
blossoms
And
of
it can.
eternity
Uh,
there.
the,
So I can know what I'm talking about a little better when I go to find a quote to put on this when I post it when it's done. But that's it for the moment. So thank you for watching. It's Adam Search broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico. Working on oil painting Space Mountain.
Contemplated internationally
Have a good night, Earth.
could meet the goals